The Great Hall of Zentara Prime buzzed with quiet conversation. Alien delegates from across the galaxy sat in their assigned seats, discussing trade routes and mining rights. The Galactic Council had ruled the stars for 3,000 years, and today felt like any other peaceful day. Chancellor Sektar adjusted his scales and looked over the day's agenda. The reptilian leader had served the council for 200 years. His cold yellow eyes scanned the room, counting the representatives from 12 different species. Everything was normal. Everything was calm. That peace shattered when the warning alarms began to scream. Chancellor. A young technician rushed into the hall, his blue skin pale with fear. We have massive energy readings coming from the Sol system. Sektar's forked tongue flicked out in annoyance. Impossible. That system was sealed 3,000 years ago. Check your instruments. The technician's hands shook as he held up his datapad. Sir, the readings are real. 500 ships, maybe more. They're heading straight for us. A nervous laugh echoed through the hall. Hive Queen Zilnara, her insect features clicking with amusement, spoke in her buzzing voice. The Sol system? You mean Earth? Those primitive humans destroyed themselves long ago, everyone knows that. Other delegates nodded in agreement. Earth was just a story now, a warning tale told to young species about the dangers of violence and war. The humans had been too aggressive, too unpredictable. The Council had done the galaxy a favor by cutting them off from the rest of civilization, but the alarms kept screaming. Light years away, Admiral Dae-ho Kim stood on the bridge of his flagship. The unified dawn was beautiful in a way that would have confused the old Council. Its hull curved like a living thing, made from materials that seemed to shift between metal and crystal. Dark energy flowed through conduits that pulsed like veins, powering systems the galaxy had never seen. Dae-ho was 45 years old, born in the outer colonies long after Earth's banishment. His black hair was streaked with silver, and his dark eyes held the weight of command. Behind him, his officers worked at stations that responded to thought as much as touch. Report, he said quietly. Dr. Bo-Ra Park looked up from her science station. At 38, she was one of humanity's greatest minds, responsible for many of the technological breakthroughs that had made this day possible. Her fingers danced over controls that existed in multiple dimensions. Zentara Prime is directly ahead, Admiral. Their defense grid is active, but their technology is exactly what our records predicted. They haven't advanced much in 3,000 years. Commander Tae-Jin Lee, the ship's pilot, turned from his station. The 32-year-old had been born among the stars, never seeing Earth until his 20th birthday. Sir, they're trying to scan us. Should I engage countermeasures? Let them look, Dae-ho said with a slight smile. They'll see what we want them to see. Hai-Wan Choi stepped up beside the Admiral. The diplomatic envoy was 41, and she had spent years studying the old Council records. She knew their languages, their customs, and their fears. Admiral, they're broadcasting on all frequencies, demanding identification and stating that this system is off limits to unauthorized vessels. Unauthorized, Dae-ho repeated, tasting the word. After 3,000 years, they still think they can tell us where we can and cannot go. Through the great view screen, the blue and green world of Zentara Prime grew larger. It was beautiful, Dae-ho had to admit. Cities of crystal and metal dotted the continents, connected by streams of light that carried traffic between them. Orbital stations hung in space like jewels, busy with the commerce of a dozen species. Sir, Tae-Jin said, the rest of the fleet is in position. All ships report ready. Behind the unified dawn, 499 other human vessels hung in space. Each one was different, built for specific purposes, but all shared the same flowing design that marked them as products of humanity's long exile. They had been built in shipyards hidden in the dark between stars, forged by a people who had spent 3 millennia learning to survive alone. Back on Zentara Prime, panic was spreading through the Council chambers. The impossible fleet had appeared, out of nowhere, moving through space in ways that broke every law of physics the Council understood. Their ships seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once, slipping between space and time like ghosts. Get me Admiral Caxtor, Sektar hissed. Deploy the defense fleet. I don't care what those readings say, no primitive species could. His words died as the main screen activated. The image was crystal clear, transmitted on frequencies that shouldn't have been possible. It showed the bridge of an alien ship, but the beings standing there were unmistakably human. The man in the center stepped forward. He wore a uniform of deep blue, cut in a style that was both elegant and practical. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with an intensity that made even Sektar take a step back. Members of the Galactic Council, Admiral Daeho Kim said, his voice carrying clearly across space. I am Admiral Daeho Kim of the United Earth Alliance. We have returned to collect what was stolen from us. The chamber fell silent. 3,000 years of carefully maintained lies crumbled in an instant. The humans hadn't destroyed themselves. They hadn't faded into extinction. They had survived and grown, and now they were back. This is Chancellor Sektar of the Galactic Council, the reptilian leader managed to say. Earth was quarantined for the safety of all species. You have no right to be here. Daeho's expression didn't change. No right? We were banished from our own galaxy. Our ships were destroyed, our people were imprisoned, and you say we have no right? Dr. Bo-Ra Park stepped into view behind the Admiral. Her voice was softer but somehow more frightening. We have detailed records, Chancellor. Every decision, every vote, every lie you told about us. We know exactly what you did. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. Outside, the human fleet held position, neither advancing nor retreating. They simply waited, like predators who had finally cornered their prey. Sektar's claws dug into his chair. In 3 centuries of leadership, he had never faced anything like this. The humans were supposed to be gone, erased from history. Instead, they had returned with technology that made the Council's greatest achievements look like children's toys. Sir? The blue-skinned technician whispered. They're requesting permission to send a diplomatic shuttle to the surface. Denied. Sektar snapped. They're terrorists, criminals. We don't negotiate with... Chancellor, Hive Queen Zilnara interrupted, her voice unusually quiet. Perhaps we should listen to what they have to say. They could have attacked us by now, but they haven't. Sektar looked around the chamber. Fear was written on every face, in every gesture. The other delegates were already thinking the same, thing he was trying not to admit. After 3,000 years, the humans had come home and they wanted answers. Hyun Soo-yoon stood in the archive chamber of the Unified Dawn, surrounded by holographic displays that showed the history his people could never forget. At 67, he was old enough to remember the stories his grandfather had told him about Earth before the banishment. Now, as humanity's chief historian, he carried the burden of every crime committed against his species. Show me the records from 2024, he said to the quantum computer that responded to his thoughts. The air around him filled with images and documents, 3-dimensional records that captured every detail of humanity's first contact with the galaxy. Young humans in primitive spacesuits shaking hands with alien delegates, the excitement in their eyes as they saw the wonders of galactic civilization, the hope in their voices as they spoke of joining the great community of stars. Hyun-Soo had watched these recordings thousands of times, but they still made his heart ache. The first meetings had gone well. Humans were curious, eager to learn, quick to adapt. Within months, they were speaking alien languages and understanding technologies that should have taken decades to master. The Galactic Council welcomed them as a promising new species. But that welcome didn't last long. Show me the Kepler station incident, Hyun-Soo whispered. The display changed to show a research station orbiting a distant star. Human scientists worked alongside their alien colleagues, studying the cosmic radiation that bathed the system. Dr. Sarah Chen, one of Earth's brightest minds, had been examining readings from the station's deep space sensors when she discovered something that shouldn't have existed. Ships. Cloaked ships, hidden in the radiation shadow of the system's star. Ships that were taking beings from the primitive world below. Dr. Veltar, Sarah had called to her Varix colleague, what are these? Readings? There are vessels in the corona, but they're not on any flight plan. The reptilian scientist had gone very still. "You must be mistaken, Dr. Chen. There are no authorized missions in that area." But Sarah was not mistaken. The human scanning technology, crude by galactic standards but surprisingly effective, had detected a secret operation. The Council was abducting primitive beings from the planet below, taking them to hidden research facilities where they were studied like laboratory animals. When Sarah reported her findings to the Council, she was told to forget what she had seen. When she refused, she was accused of spreading dangerous lies. When other humans began asking questions, the accusations became more serious. Hyun-Soo closed his eyes as the records showed what happened next. The meeting where Chancellor Sektar, younger then but just as cold, had stood before the full council and declared humanity a threat to galactic stability. "They are too curious," the Varix leader had said, "too quick to question authority. They lack the wisdom to understand that some knowledge is too dangerous for young species." Other council members had nodded in agreement. The insectoid hive queen had spoken of human reckless behavior. The aquatic cetaceans had worried about disruption of established order. One by one, the species that had welcomed humanity turned against them. The vote to banish Earth had been 11-1, with only the crystalline Zenkari speaking in humanity's defense. Hyun-Soo opened his eyes and waved the historical records away. In the present, he knew that Captain So Young-han was already on Zentara Prime, gathering proof that the Council's crimes had continued for 3,000 years. So Young was 29, born in the dark ships that had fled Earth's solar system during the banishment. She had never seen a sunrise on Earth, never felt natural wind or breathed unfiltered air. Her childhood had been spent in the hidden colonies where humanity had rebuilt itself, far from Council surveillance. Now she moved through the capital, city of Zentara Prime, like a ghost, her advanced cloaking technology making her invisible to every sensor the Council possessed. Her mission was simple: find the modern research facilities and document what she found. It didn't take long. The first facility was hidden beneath the city's main hospital, accessed through maintenance tunnels that official records claimed didn't exist. So Young's recording equipment captured everything as she moved through corridors lined with cells. Inside each cell was a being from a different world, kept alive for experiments that would have horrified any civilized society. She recognized some of the species: gentle farmers from the rim worlds whose only crime had been developing faster than light communication, ocean dwellers from Aquatica 7 who had discovered a new form of energy, a family of crystal-based life forms who had learned to manipulate gravity. All of them were here because they had shown potential, because they had discovered something the Council wanted to understand and control. So Young's hands shook as she recorded the evidence. 3,000 years and nothing had changed. If anything, the Council's crimes had gotten worse. They had learned to be more careful, more secretive, but they had never stopped taking beings from their homes for illegal research. In one cell, she found something that made her blood run cold. A human woman, suspended in a stasis field that kept her young and alive. According to the cell's data display, she had been there for over 1,000 years, taken during one of humanity's early exploration missions. "My name is Captain So Young-han of the United Earth Alliance," she whispered into her recorder. "I am documenting crimes against sapient life committed by the Galactic Council. The date is..." She paused, thinking of the calendar humanity used, now based on the years of their exile. The date is 3847 after banishment. As she moved through the facility, So Young found evidence of dozens of other operations: secret labs on distant worlds, hidden fleets that carried out abductions, research stations disguised as mining operations. The Council had built an empire of suffering, justified by their belief that advanced species had the right to study lesser ones. Back on the Unified Dawn, Admiral Daeho Kim received So Young's initial report through quantum communication channels the Council couldn't intercept. He read the data with growing anger, though his face remained calm. "Dr. Park," he called to his science officer. Bo-Ra looked up from her analysis of Council technology. "Yes, Admiral. How long until our full fleet is in position?" "Another 6 hours, sir. The stealth ships are already around their key worlds and the main battle groups are moving into the outer systems. Deho nodded. And their response to our presence? Confused panic mostly. They've activated their defense fleets, but they don't seem to understand what they're looking at. Their sensors can barely detect our ships, and they have no idea how we're moving through space the way we are. Commander Taijin turned from his pilot station. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from Zentara Prime. Chancellor Sektar is requesting a formal meeting. Is he now? Deho's voice was cold. Tell the Chancellor that we'll be happy to meet with him, but the meeting will be on our terms, and he'll answer for every crime his council has committed. Hewan Choi stepped forward, her diplomatic training making her voice careful and measured. Admiral, perhaps we should consider a more gradual approach. The council is clearly frightened. If we push too hard too fast, they might do something desperate. They've had 3,000 years to change, Deho replied. Captain Han's evidence shows they've only gotten worse. No, Hewan. The time for gradual approaches ended when they banished us from our own galaxy. On Zentara Prime, Chancellor Sektar paced in his private chambers, his claws clicking against the crystal floor. The human fleet hung in space like a sword over his head, and every hour brought new reports of impossible technology. His science advisors had analyzed the brief transmission from the human admiral. The signal had been broadcast on frequencies that shouldn't exist, using principles of physics that the Council's greatest minds didn't understand. Worse, deep space sensors were detecting human ships throughout Council space, appearing and disappearing like phantoms. Sir, his aide announced, we have a preliminary report from the research division. They believe the humans have achieved some form of dimensional manipulation technology. Their ships appear to exist in multiple phases of space-time simultaneously. Sektar stopped pacing. How is that possible? 3,000 years ago, they barely had fusion power. The researchers believe they may have discovered something during their exile, something that accelerated their technological development far beyond normal patterns. The Chancellor's yellow eyes narrowed. If that was true, if the humans had stumbled onto some cosmic secret during their banishment, then everything the Council had built might be at risk. Outside his window, the stars themselves seemed different, now as if the return of humanity had changed the very nature of space. Sektar had ruled for centuries, but he had never felt as small and vulnerable as he did in this moment. The humans had come home, and they brought with them the weight of 3,000 years of injustice. The great assembly hall of Zentara Prime had never seen anything like this. Every seat was filled, not just with council delegates, but with representatives from hundreds of worlds, all gathered to witness what many believed would be the most important moment in galactic history. Hewan Choi walked down the central aisle with steady steps, her diplomatic uniform a deep blue that matched the human fleet hanging in space above them. Behind her walked two guards, Wu Jin Lee and another officer, their presence more symbolic than protective. If the humans had wanted to use force, they would have done so already. The 41-year-old diplomat had spent years preparing for this moment, studying every language, every custom, every legal precedent the Council had established over 3 millennia. She knew their laws better than most of them did, and she was about to use that knowledge against them. Chancellor Sektar sat in his elevated chair, his reptilian features carefully controlled despite the fear she could smell on him. Around the chamber, other delegates whispered among themselves, their various languages creating a buzz of nervous energy. Members of the Galactic Council, Hewan began, her voice carrying clearly through translation systems. I am Hewan Choi, diplomatic, representative of the United Earth Alliance. I stand before you today not as a petitioner, but as the voice of justice long delayed. She raised her hand, and holographic displays filled the air above the assembly. Images of the secret research facilities Captain So Young Han had discovered. Documentation of abductions spanning thousands of years. Evidence of experiments that violated every treaty the Council claimed to uphold. The chamber fell silent as the horrible truth spread before them. 3,000 years ago, Hewan continued, humanity was banished from this galaxy. We were told it was for the safety of all species, that we were too violent, too unpredictable to be trusted with galactic citizenship. She gestured to the displays where images of tortured beings flickered like accusations. But the truth was different. We were banished because we discovered your crimes, because we asked questions you didn't want answered, because we threatened to expose the system of exploitation you had built. Chancellor Sektar leaned forward, his voice hissing with anger. These images could be fabricated. Humans have always been skilled at deception. Before Haiwan could respond, another voice echoed through the chamber. They are not fabricated. A figure materialized in the center of the room, transmitted by technology, that made several delegates gasp in shock. It was a human man, but his appearance told a story of suffering that made even hardened politicians flinch. Insu John was 34 years old, but he looked older. Scars covered his arms and face, marks left by medical procedures that had been performed without his consent. His eyes held a pain that 3 decades of healing had never fully erased. "My name is Insu Jian," he said, his voice steady despite the memories he was about to share. 34 years ago, I was taken from my home on Kepler Colony during what your records call a routine mining survey. I was 5 years old. The chamber was so quiet that the hum of the building's system seemed loud. For 29 years, I was kept in Research Facility Omega-7, located in the Vega system. I was Subject 47 in a study designed to understand human neural development. The researchers wanted to know why humans adapted so quickly to new environments. Insu rolled up his sleeves, showing more scars. They performed surgery on me 847 times. They mapped every nerve in my body. They recorded my dreams and studied my fears. When I grew too old for their neural studies, they moved me to physical endurance tests. Hive Queen Zilnara's compound eyes clicked rapidly, a sign of distress among her species. This cannot be true. The Council has protocols, safeguards. The protocols were followed exactly, Insu replied, his voice gaining strength. Every procedure was properly documented. Every test was approved by Council. Oversight committees. The only thing that wasn't legal was my presence there, but that was easily overlooked. He turned to face Chancellor Sektar directly. I was rescued 6 years ago by a human liberation team. Since then, I have helped free 847 other beings from Council research facilities. Some had been prisoners for longer than I was alive. Dr. Bora Park's voice came through the transmission systems, calm and scientific. We are broadcasting live feeds from 17 different Council research installations. What you are seeing is happening right now, as we speak. The holographic displays shifted to show real-time images, beings trapped in cells connected to machines that studied their biology. Scientists in Council uniforms taking notes while their subjects suffered. On one screen, a young cetacean female floated in a tank too small for her species, her song, distorted by the liquid that kept her alive but imprisoned. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. Centuries of crimes spread out before the assembly like a cancer exposed to light. But Chancellor Sektar was not finished fighting. Even if these facilities exist, he hissed, they serve a greater purpose. The advancement of galactic science, the protection of established civilization. Sometimes difficult choices must be made for the greater good. That was when Admiral Dae-ho Kim's voice filled the chamber, transmitted from his flagship above. Difficult choices? The Admiral's image appeared beside Insu's, his face a mask of controlled fury. You call the torture of innocent beings a difficult choice? Sektar stood from his chair, his full height impressive, but somehow diminished by the presence of the humans. Admiral, your species was banished for good reason. You were violent, unpredictable. Look at how you return now with weapons and threats. Weapons? Daeho's laugh was cold. Chancellor, if we had come here with violence in mind, this conversation would not be happening. You would not be happening. To prove his point, the Admiral gestured to Commander Taejin Lee, who was standing at his pilot station. Commander, please demonstrate our peaceful intentions. Taejin's hands moved over controls that seemed to respond to thought as much as touch. Outside Zentara Prime, the planet's entire defense grid simply stopped. Massive orbital weapons, platforms powered down, Shield generators went offline. Patrol ships found their engines suddenly unresponsive. We have disabled every military asset in this system, Deho announced calmly. Not destroyed, disabled. Your weapons still exist, but they no longer function. Your shields are down, but your cities are untouched. Your patrol ships are powerless, but their crews are unharmed. The demonstration sent shockwaves through the assembly. The Council's most advanced technology had been neutralized in seconds, not through brute force, but through methods they couldn't even understand. This is how we could have announced our return, the Admiral continued. We could have arrived in silence, disabled your defenses, and simply taken what we wanted. Instead, we came here to talk. Because despite everything you have done to us, and others, we still believe in justice over revenge. Yoonji Kim stepped into view behind her father, the 26-year-old quantum warfare specialist representing humanity's new generation. The technology you've just witnessed is child's play compared to what we've developed during our exile. We can reach through dimensions to touch your ships. We can manipulate the quantum foundations of matter itself. We can render your weapons useless by convincing them they don't exist. She paused, letting that sink in. But we won't use these abilities to conquer you. We're here to free the beings you've imprisoned and bring justice for the crimes you've committed. Nothing more, nothing less. Chancellor Sektar looked around the chamber, seeing fear and uncertainty on every face. His own government was crumbling before his eyes as delegates began to question everything they had been told about humanity's banishment. The aquatic delegate Auralin was the first to speak. If these accusations are true, then the Council has violated the fundamental principles of sapient rights. We cannot ignore evidence of this magnitude. Other delegates began to nod in agreement. The crystal being representative projected harmonics of distress. The gaseous nebulari pulsed with colors that indicated deep shame, but Sektar was not ready to surrender. You forget yourselves, he roared. The Council has maintained peace for 3,000 years. These humans come here with their advanced weapons and their accusations, and you're ready to throw away millennia of progress? Progress? Insujan's voice cut through the Chancellor's words like a blade. You call the suffering of millions progress? You call the imprisonment of innocent beings peace? The young man's scars seemed to glow under the chamber's lights, each mark a testimony to the Council's failures. I spent 29 years in your peaceful galaxy, Chancellor. I know exactly what your progress costs. Admiral Deho's image leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Sektar. The evidence is before you. The crimes are undeniable. We are prepared to offer terms for a peaceful resolution, but those terms are not negotiable. What terms? Auralin asked, her aquatic voice rippling with hope. Complete dissolution of the current Council structure, release of all beings held in research facilities, full reparations to affected species, and trials for those responsible for these crimes. The chamber erupted in shouts and arguments, but through it all the human fleet waited in space above them, patient as death. The galaxy was splitting apart. Kyung-min, stood on the bridge of the humanitarian vessel Mercy's Light, watching as another group of Council refugees arrived at the processing station. The 31-year-old coordinator had been working without sleep for 3 days, organizing the largest rescue operation in galactic history. How many this time? She asked her assistant, a young cetacean named Dalion who had volunteered after learning about the secret facilities. 237 beings from the Rigel facility, Dalion replied, his translated voice heavy with sorrow. Some have been imprisoned for over 50 years. The medical teams say many will need extensive therapy before they can return to normal life. Kyungmin nodded, making notes on her digital tablet. Since Admiral Deho's ultimatum 3 weeks ago, the galaxy had descended into chaos. Progressive Council members like Auralin had immediately supported the human demands, opening their facilities for inspection and releasing any prisoners they found. But the hardline faction led by Chancellor Sektar had retreated to their fortress worlds, taking their darkest secrets with them. Ma'am, another voice called out. It was me, Young, Song, the cultural liaison who helped traumatized refugees adjust to freedom. We have a problem with the latest group from Vega Prime. What kind of problem? Mi Young's 36-year-old face was etched with concern. Some of them don't want to leave. They've been prisoners for so long that captivity is all they know. They're afraid of the outside world. It was a problem they faced at every facility they liberated. Beings who had been taken as children and knew no life beyond the research labs. Adults who had been imprisoned for decades and couldn't imagine existing without their captors. The psychological damage was often worse than the physical injuries. Set up extended care facilities on Kepler Station, Kyungmin decided. Give them time to adjust. Let them choose when they're ready to go home, if they ever are. She looked out at the vast space around them, where human ships moved like gentle giants among the refugee transports. Admiral Kim had deployed the entire fleet not for conquest, but for rescue, turning humanity's most advanced warships into mobile hospitals and relief centers. But even as they saved thousands, darker news came from the hardline systems. On the 4. Bridge of the Unified Dawn, Dongwoo Park studied tactical displays that showed a galaxy at war with itself. The 44-year-old military strategist had served in the hidden conflicts that humanity fought during their exile, but he had never seen anything like this. Admiral, he reported to Daiho, Chancellor Sektar has consolidated his forces around the Draco Fortress system. 12 loyal council species, their combined fleets, and something else. Something else? Dongwoo highlighted a massive structure on the display. Long-range sensors detect a planet-killer weapon, something that can destroy entire worlds from across star systems. Sektar is threatening to use it against any world that supports our demands. Admiral Daiho studied the information with growing concern. In 3 weeks of liberation campaigns, humanity had proven they could disable any council technology without causing permanent harm. Their consciousness disruption fields could knock out enemy crews without killing them. Their quantum manipulation could turn off weapon systems while leaving life support intact. But a planet killer was different. It was designed for one purpose: genocide. Sir, Commander Tae-jin reported from his station. We're receiving a transmission from Chancellor Sektar. It's being broadcast across the galaxy. The image that appeared on the main screen showed the Varix leader standing in what looked like a command center, carved from black stone. Behind him, massive displays showed the planet-killer weapon charging its deadly systems. People of the galaxy, Sektar began, his voice echoing with fanatic conviction. We face the greatest threat in our civilization's history. The humans have returned not as peaceful neighbors but as conquerors, using advanced weapons to destroy our way of life. Admiral Daiho's jaw tightened. Even now, facing overwhelming evidence of his crimes, the Chancellor continued to lie. I have taken control of the Omega device, Sektar continued, a weapon capable of protecting our civilization from any threat. If the human fleet does not withdraw from Council space within 72 hours, I will demonstrate its power on the human colony of New Sol. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in shocked silence. New Sol was one of the hidden colonies where humanity had rebuilt after the banishment. 2 million people lived there, including many of the children who represented humanity's future. Sir, Dr. Bora Park said quietly, our scans of the Omega device show it's powered by bio-neural energy. They're using living beings as a power source. The full horror of the situation became clear. The planet killer wasn't just a weapon. It was a torture device on a cosmic scale, and Sektar was threatening to use it against innocent civilians. How long to charge the weapon? Daiho asked. At current power level, 68 hours, but Admiral... Bora paused, her voice breaking slightly. The bio-neural patterns we're detecting, some of them are human, prisoners from the original banishment, kept alive for 3,000 years to power their weapons. Commander Tae-jin turned from his station, his young face pale with rage. Sir, request permission to take a strike team into the fortress. We can disable the weapon before it fires. How many would you need? 50 ships, maybe 100. But the casualties would be severe. Their defenses are designed to kill, not disable. We'd have to use lethal force to get through. Admiral Daiho closed his eyes. Throughout humanity's return, They had been careful to prove they were different from the species that had banished them. They had used non-lethal weapons, healing technology, consciousness manipulation that left their enemies alive and unharmed. They had shown the galaxy that evolution was possible, that a species could grow beyond violence and conquest. But now Chancellor Sektar was forcing them to choose between their principles and their people's survival. There has to be another way, the Admiral said. Dongwu, analysis of the fortress defenses. What are our options? The strategist worked quickly, his displays showing the impossible challenges they faced. The fortress is built into an asteroid field powered by the planet killer itself. Their shields can absorb anything we throw at them and convert it to weapon energy. Traditional assault would take days, and we don't have days. What about quantum infiltration? They've learned from our previous operations. They're using dimensional anchors that prevent phase shifting. Any ship that tries to quantum tunnel inside the fortress gets trapped between dimensions. Dr. Bora looked up from her science station. Sir, I might have something. The bio-neural power system has a weakness. If we could disrupt the neural patterns without harming the beings providing them, we could cause a cascade failure. How? We'd need someone to interface directly with the system, to merge their consciousness with the fortress's neural network and convince it to shut down. But, she hesitated. But what, Doctor? But whoever does it might not come back. The neural patterns would have to be completely integrated with the system. They'd essentially become part of the weapon to destroy it from within. The bridge fell silent. What Bora was describing was a suicide mission with extra steps. Whoever volunteered would save millions of lives but might lose their own consciousness in the process. Sir, a young voice said from the engineering station. I volunteer. Everyone turned to look at Seon Ho Lim, the 28-year-old quantum engineer who had been quietly working on modifications to their dimensional technology. His face was calm, but his hands shook slightly as he spoke. I designed most of our consciousness integration systems, he continued. If anyone can interface with their neural network and come back intact, it's me. Admiral Daeho studied the young man, who was volunteering to sacrifice himself for the mission. Seon Ho, you understand what you're proposing. You might not survive. Sir, with respect, 2 million people on New Sol definitely won't survive if we do nothing. And if the weapon works against them, Sektar will use it against other worlds too. This isn't just about saving one colony. It's about stopping a genocide. The Admiral looked around his bridge, seeing the same determination in every face. His people had spent 3,000 years evolving beyond the violence that had defined their ancestors. But evolution didn't mean becoming weak. Sometimes it meant becoming strong enough to sacrifice everything for what was right. Very well, he said finally. Seon Ho, begin preparations for neural integration. But we're not sending you alone. If this mission has any chance of success, we'll need multiple approaches. As the young engineer nodded and headed for the quantum laboratory, Admiral Daeho stared at the display showing the fortress system. Somewhere in that dark place, beings who had suffered for millennia were being used to power a weapon of unimaginable destruction. In 66 hours, Chancellor Sektar would learn that some choices came with prices too high for any civilization to pay. Seon Ho Lim stood in the quantum chamber, his body connected to machines that hummed with energy beyond normal physics. The 28-year-old engineer had spent his entire life working with consciousness technology integration, but nothing had prepared him for what he was about to attempt. Neural pathways are stable, Dr. Bora Park reported from the control room. Quantum field generators are operating at optimal levels. Seon Ho, are you ready? Through the intercom, his voice sounded calm despite the magnitude of what he was facing. Ready, Doctor. Beginning dimensional phase shift in 3, 2, 1. The chamber filled with light that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Seon Ho's physical form began to shimmer and fade as his consciousness prepared to tunnel through space and time directly into the heart of the Draco Fortress system. On the bridge of the Unified Dawn, Admiral Daeho Kim watched the countdown timer that showed 57 hours until the Omega device would fire on New Sol. His fleet was positioned around the fortress system, But traditional weapons would be useless against shields powered by the planet killer itself. "Sir," Commander Taejin reported, "Sion Ho has successfully phased into the fortress's neural network. We're receiving his consciousness signal, but it's getting weaker as he integrates with their systems. The plan was desperate but elegant. Instead of fighting the fortress's defenses, Sion Ho would become part of them, infiltrating the bio-neural power system from within. If he could reach the imprisoned beings who powered the weapon, he might be able to free them without triggering the defensive systems." But there was another element to the plan that only a few knew about. Deep in the fortress, young Hee Cho moved. Through corridors she had helped design 70 years ago, the 78-year-old council member was one of the few surviving architects of humanity's original banishment, and the guilt of that decision had eaten at her for decades. When the human fleet had returned, she had been the first to offer her assistance, not out of fear but out of a desperate need to make amends for the greatest mistake of her long life. "The central neural chamber is 2 levels down," she whispered into her communicator, speaking to the human team that had infiltrated the fortress with her help. "But be careful. The corridors are monitored by bioelectric sensors that can detect emotional states." Young Hee had spent 3,000 years studying human psychology, trying to understand the species her vote had helped banish. She had learned their languages, read their literature, followed their hidden development from afar. When Chancellor Sektar had ordered the construction of the Omega device using human prisoners as power sources, she had been horrified but too old and powerless to stop it. Now, finally, she had a chance to save the people she had failed so long. The central neural chamber was a cathedral of suffering. Hundreds of beings floated in bioelectric suspension fields, their minds connected to the massive weapon that hung in space above them. Some were species young Hee recognized, taken from their homes across the centuries. Others were completely alien, beings from worlds so distant that the Council had no official contact with them. And in the center of it all, in suspension fields marked with special containment protocols, were the humans. They had been young when they were taken, crew members from exploration ships that had ventured too far from Earth during humanity's early expansion. 3,000 years in biosuspension had kept their bodies alive, but left their minds trapped in a nightmare of forced consciousness, their thoughts harvested to power weapons they would have died to prevent. But something strange had happened during those millennia of forced connection. Instead of breaking under the torture, some of the human prisoners had achieved something impossible. They had learned to exist as pure consciousness, transcending their physical forms while somehow maintaining their individual identities. When Sion Ho's quantum-shifted awareness touched the neural network, he found them waiting for him. "Welcome, young one," a voice spoke directly into his mind. It was gentle but carried the weight of unimaginable suffering. "We have been hoping someone would come." "Who are you?" Sion Ho asked, his consciousness spreading through the network, like light through fiber optic cables. "We are the first," the voice replied. "The humans taken before your people learned to hide. We have been here since the beginning, powering their weapons, feeling every life they took with our stolen strength." More voices joined the first, a chorus of minds that had endured 3,000 years of imprisonment, but somehow retained their humanity. "The weapon is charging," another voice warned. "In 53 hours they will force us to destroy your colony. But we have learned something during our time here. We know how to break the neural bonds, but it requires a sacrifice." Sion Ho felt his consciousness spreading further through the network, touching minds from dozens of species. All of them were in pain. All of them were trapped, but they were also connected in ways their captors had never intended. What kind of sacrifice? One of us must become the neural controller, taking on the pain of everyone else to break their connections. It will destroy whoever does it, but it will free the others and disable the weapon. Young Hee Cho's voice crackled through the fortress's communication system as she reached the central chamber. "The defensive systems are activating. Whatever you're going to do, you need to do it now." On the bridge of the Unified Dawn, Admiral Daeho watched as energy readings from the fortress began to spike. "Report, sir," Dr. Bora called out. "The fortress's neural network is destabilizing. Seon-Ho's integration is causing cascade failures throughout their power grid. And the weapon? Still charging, but the power flow is becoming erratic. If the neural network collapses completely, the weapon will lose containment and destroy the fortress. Admiral Dae-Ho faced an impossible choice. If Seon-Ho succeeded in freeing the prisoners, the resulting explosion would kill everyone in the fortress, including Chancellor Sektar and his followers. It would be justice, but it would also make humanity responsible for the deaths of thousands of beings. That was when Young Hee-cho's voice came through the communication system one last time. Admiral Kim, this is Council Member Young Hee-cho. I am implementing Emergency Protocol 77 Alpha. Authorization Code, Redemption. On her command, hidden systems throughout the fortress activated. Not weapons or defenses, but medical systems she had secretly installed decades ago when she first learned about the Omega device. Stasis fields designed to protect the fortress's population in case of catastrophic failure. Seon-Ho, she called out. You don't have to choose between saving the prisoners and saving their captors. Save everyone. In the neural network, Seon-Ho felt the transcended humans reaching out to him, offering their accumulated knowledge and power. Together, the first voice said, we can do this together. Instead of one consciousness taking on the burden of neural control, all of them shared it. Seon-Ho's quantum-shifted awareness combined with the transcended minds of the ancient prisoners, and together they reached out to every being in the network. One by one, the neural bonds snapped harmlessly. Prisoners who had been trapped for centuries suddenly found themselves free, their minds their own again. The weapon's power source disappeared not in a catastrophic failure but in a gentle release, like prisoners walking out of unlocked cells. Captain, Omega device deprived of its bioneural power, simply shut down. Throughout the fortress, stasis fields activated automatically, protecting Chancellor Sektar and his followers as the facility's power systems failed. They would survive, but they would wake up as prisoners themselves, facing trial for their crimes. Young Hee-cho smiled as the stasis field enveloped her. After 70 years of guilt, she had finally found redemption. On the bridge of the Unified Dawn, Admiral Dae-Ho received the impossible report. Total success with 0 casualties. Sir, Commander Tae-jin said, his voice filled with amazement. We're receiving signals from the fortress. Seon-Ho is alive and conscious. The prisoners are free. Even Chancellor Sektar and his people are unharmed in medical stasis. Dr. Bora looked up from her instruments, tears streaming down her face. Admiral, we're detecting quantum signatures unlike anything we've ever seen. Some of the human prisoners, they've evolved into something beyond physical existence. They're offering to help us rebuild the galaxy. 6 months later, Admiral Dae-Ho Kim stood on the observation deck of Unity Station, a massive space facility orbiting Earth. Through the transparent walls, he could see ships from dozens of species coming and going, carrying delegates to the new Galactic Federation that had replaced the corrupt Council. The trials of the old Council leadership had been fair and thorough. Chancellor Sektar, faced with undeniable evidence and a clear mind freed from the neurological condition that had driven his paranoia, had confessed to his crimes and accepted rehabilitation rather than punishment. Many of his followers had done the same. Young Hee-cho had become the first director of the Federation's Ethics Committee, her long experience and deep remorse making her uniquely qualified to prevent future abuses. Seon-Ho Lim had survived his neural integration, but he was changed. His consciousness could now exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, making him one of humanity's first transcended beings.